What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are on to full-on off-season content. We're not talking NBA Finals because the day that we are recording this, Game 5 of the NBA Finals, which we both just hope objectively is not the final game of the NBA Finals, but it's going to take place in a few hours, so we're not going to talk about it. We are instead going to get to our off-season look-aheads, not previews, because they're fancy schmancy and way better than previews, right, Grant? So we're on to the Central Division this year. We are breaking them up into divisions. Again, it feels more digestible and it gives us more content to put out, and lets us spend a little bit. If you're trying to spend 5 minutes on each team, it feels like some teams you can do in 5 minutes. I feel like some teams you need a little bit more. But before we get started, Grant, the most important question of all: how much cap space does the Hughes family have?
We're not a second apron team. I can tell you that. We're really just trying to stay above the salary floor. That's how we like to operate. So ample cap space, I would say.
Yeah. But are you actually doing well?
I'm actively doing well. I'm excited to get through or get into these division prospectuses. What's the plural of prospectus? Prospecti?
I was trying to figure out if cleverer or if it was more clever or cleverer was the way to before we started airing. So we are in, it's not rare form. I guess we're in finals form.
Pretty standard form. No, because I know you and we both spend like this portion of the year for our day jobs is just like, constant trade free agency stuff. And it's good to just get like, we're not going to spend 30 minutes on each of these teams. So it's good to just be like, okay, what are the must knows? What are the numbers we got to know? What are the, most relevant players, decisions, whatever, just to sort of almost like as a reset before things like all go to shit and like things actually start moving transactionally.
And so we'll get into spending tools, cap space. I'll outlay it very quickly. Some of the new rules that are kicking in for people that don't necessarily like this stuff, or, well, I hope you like it because you're listening to it, but maybe as like good. Honestly, look, let's have the candor here. We're all still trying to figure out this CBA thing. There's I consider myself a cap dork. But the amount of times I need to like double and triple check the things that I'm saying are accurate. So we'll get into that stuff. We'll talk. We have like notable extension candidates, but there's just going to be situations where it's like, okay, DeAndre Ayton being extension eligible for the Blazers. We're not going to talk about that because it doesn't really fucking matter. Or something like if it comes up a name like that. So yeah, the Central Division's interesting. I guess the very quick like notes at the beginning would be the apron stuff is just getting harsher. So the salary cap set at 141, the luxury tax at 172, the first apron is at 179, and the second apron is at 190. And if you're going over the second apron, that might be the one that people need to know more. Is you can't aggregate salaries in trades, can't take back more money than you send out in trades. You can take back multiple players for one. So if the Suns wanted to trade Kevin Durant for 5 players, as long as they don't make more than Kevin Durant, the exact amount of Kevin Durant, they can get those 5 players back. The pick frozen stuff will matter, that your pick gets frozen 7 years out, but that's like not really coming into play just yet. Well, you don't have access to the taxpayer mid-level exception. That's only for teams between the first and second aprons, which is why ducking the second apron might be valuable. This is stuff we should just talk about as we go on, because I don't want to go through the whole spiel each time we record, but those are just no cash going out in trades. Like that's going to be like, this offseason is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, a good shorthand, I think, for me is just really, I just think about the Suns because they were kind of the first team Milwaukee too, to a certain extent, to just plunge into it. And it's like kind of like if you're struggling with any of this stuff, just understand that a second apron team is kind of like you can sign guys for the minimum. Like that's, if you're talking about acquisition tools, that's with some exceptions, that's really what you're dealing with. And then, like you said, it's very, very difficult to, like the move used to be, let's put together 3 $10 to $12 million salaries. We get up to a max. We ship those guys out with a pick attached and we get one guy. Like, can't do that anymore. Like, practically speaking, I think those are the ones that like, keep those in mind. And some of the more like obscure minutia we'll touch on as it comes up in certain circumstances. But like, that's just how I think, if you're not in love with all the machinations of the CBA, like kind of understand those two things and you get a rough idea of like, what some of these teams are dealing with.
And we'll refer now everyone back to the beginning of the Central Division Offseason Outlook podcast because that's where we get into it. And there's some interesting draft pick minutia with it when it comes to cap holds, but I think we'll leave that for the teams that it actually affects. And with that, Grant, where do we begin?
We start with Chicago. So the Bulls.
Do we have to?
Well, we got to start somewhere. So notably, I think we've got to pay attention to DeMar DeRozan is an unrestricted free agent. The team did not trade him at the last deadline. We were, screaming about that. That's just a situation. I think you and I both agree you can't get to unrestricted free agency in this situation. Here they are. They have early bird rights on Andre Drummond, also a free agent. Patrick Williams, former number 4 pick, is hitting restricted free agency. That's the situation to watch. Their overall finances, about $38 million under the tax, and that's before you consider new contracts for Torrey Craig, who's got a player option, DeRozan, Drummond, Javonte Green, and Patrick Williams. In terms of like their spending tools, looking like the mini mid-level, which this year is going to be starting at $5.2 million. Hard to imagine them getting access to the full mid-level, barring some pretty substantial changes. And that mini mid-level figure is calculated based on them keeping 2 of DeRozan, Drummond, and Williams. If they keep all 3, then I don't know, we can talk about that. The main extension candidate, Alex Caruso, is eligible for 4 years, $78 million. That's actually a figure, dollars and years, that is going to come up a couple more times, maybe not in this division, but
it's an estimate because it's based off the average salary of the league, since he makes less than that, and we don't know what that's going to be yet. Like, we don't even know what this year's actual average salary is yet, I don't think. But
no, so that's good to note. And I mean, their biggest needs, like, you and I think would both say a reality check, or a willingness to get off the treadmill. But if you're talking positionally, wings, a primary playmaker, I guess, in relief of Kobe White, combo forward obviously would be a significant one if Patrick Williams is gone, or you just don't believe in him anymore as a Bulls organization. Two-way bigs. You still have Nick Vucevic there, but Andre Drummond just frankly
problem.
Andre Drummond outplayed him, I mean, for most of last year. So, and he's a free agent. So yeah, I mean, I'll throw it to you here. Maybe this is the point where we should kind of flip it is what are their biggest questions? And then we can talk about our biggest questions, priorities, whatever, and then targets that they might look at to address those.
Well, I think we need to come to a consensus of what not to almost talk about, because, and that would be that, are they going to view it as a long-term and start trading guys and not re-signing guys? I think we've seen the answer, and the answer is no, they're not going to do that. So we actually, as long as you agree, we just need to talk about, are they bringing all their own free agents back? And then the fact that they're, $38 million or whatever the number is beneath that, the tax sounds like a ton of room. But if you have to pay DeRozan, in theory, could eat all of that up if they decide to go 2 for $80 with him. And then that's on top of, you would have Patrick Williams on a new deal. You do have early bird rights on Drummond. The big man market's weird. So I think Williams and DeRozan are their biggest offseason inflection points. And would you expect, even of those 3 guys, the Drummond, DeRozan, and Williams, do you expect all of them to be back in Chicago? If you were to predict, if I set the over under at 1.5 of those guys being in Chicago next year, would you take the over or the under on that?
I mean, disappointingly, I'd probably go over. I think that I think it was Casey Johnson for NBC Sports, who's been plugged into the Bulls forever, floated I think it was him that floated the number you referred to for DeRozan, the 2 for $80. I just who's beating that? I don't know. That's just got to be the best offer he's going to get.
You pretend there's unfinished business if it's 2 for $80 for DeMar.
Yeah. So that's one. And then the restricted rights you've got on Patrick Williams at least gives you an inside track. God knows what the market is going to set his value at,
Well, so let's go, because we do know the price is reportedly dropped on a Zach LaVine trade, though. And I do buy into that. I'm just curious, what does that mean? Are you just taking back long-term cap relief or would you send him into, if Detroit was just I think that was more of a possibility if Troy Reaver was still running things. So I would be curious how much that price drops. So let me phrase it to you this way, though. Caruso, LaVine, DeRozan, Drummond, Patrick Williams. So we're talking about 5 guys. I'm going to set the over under on 3.5 coming back of those guys. Are you still taking the over?
God. Well, so who's the most likely to go? Because that's going to get me down to 4. And then I only got to think of one more.
Is it? I mean, The fact that DeRozan could just leave matters, but I don't know the team that's actually even going to give him an offer. I guess if Philly strikes out on all its primary targets, I like sure,
Yeah,
but they're
yeah.
not, they're not gonna. I don't, for one, I don't love that fit, so I feel like he's definitely going to be back. The fact that Patrick Williams is a restricted free agent, I don't know what team, especially if Utah is going to renegotiate and extend Larry Market and is going to be reckless with an offer for him. I think he's back, and then you're kind of relying on, well, they actually going to get rid of Alex Caruso. I think and then the Levine trade, the logistics of it are just so tough. It almost feels like Drummond is the least likely to be back.
So yeah, like that's I was as you were talking, I think I agree with that, but it's like, what is he gonna get that the center market is just so like who views him as a starter? And then if he is a starter and based on the type of center he is, like that's not a player type that's getting like he's not getting last year's Isaiah Hartenstein money. Like I don't think he's like the nine-ish million, right? There's no way he gets that. I guess I would go over because for all five of those guys, you go through them and you're like, I mean, it might just be more likely they're all there, and so than not, which is like again, I hate. I'm not going to fight the hypothetical and say like, well, but they should do X, Y, and Z, which like basically
You
involves
just
trading almost all those guys that are
right.
actually under contract.
And so I would just think they're gonna try and basically run it back and then figure out how to duck the tax on there, which is like, are they gonna try and stretch and waive Lonzo and then hope that that money has to come off the books because it sounds like he might be planning on playing next season though. So like they're not gonna get that wiped from their ledger. That's an interesting pivot point for them. Another question I have just straight up because he could get more in theory if he does go into free agency in 2025. But if you're Alex Caruso, you are over the age of 30. If they're offering you the 4 for 78 extension, are you taking it?
I think I am, just because of the injury history and the age. Like if you let's say he goes through this year and is very good when he plays, but plays 35 games or 45 games. I mean, maybe something better than 4 for 78 is available out there. I guess maybe, probably because the cap's going up and we're going to have to get unanchored from all the numbers we've become anchored to in the last couple of
Mhm.
years. But if I'm him, I want that security. I think that's it's all life changing money at that point. But I think I would be worried that if I'm him, I'm not going to stay healthy enough to definitely beat that number.
I probably would take it too, but for his part, it does feel like that he could. You're probably looking at a short-term deal windfall. I feel like if he enters
Maybe.
the market and he's 31, and is that I might roll the dice there, but he's never been caps lock paid
Hmm.
either. So I guess I would offer it too, because I actually think once the 6 months passes, his trade value goes higher if he's on that extension, right? I know it goes out
Hmm.
pretty far, but
Hmm.
if you know he's on the books for 4 for 78 after this year, you're probably more inclined to give up more than you would right now for him on an expiring, right?
Yes, I think so. Because like even with the injury risk priced in, that is not the salary of like a starter, really. So like and odds are if he is healthy, he might in fact be a starter and he might in fact be a starter on a really good team. So
Mhm.
that is good value. I don't know. It's funny, like I'm saying that's a good value contract uh for a team, but that he also should take it, which is like it kind of those two things shouldn't be able to coexist. But he's a tricky player to evaluate just because of like his specific skills, his injury history, his limitations. Like he's just it's not easy. Although I do think you would say he fits anywhere, just because what team doesn't want a guy that's going to guard like he guards and make just enough shots.
I when you're looking at targets they could add, assume like I don't think they're gonna want to spend the mini MLE. It's like then you're almost like in the minimums market, and it's already talking like, how bottom of the barrel are they gonna be searching? Is it like Joe Harris type deal, or if they're willing to use the mini MLE, does that get them into like I think Gary Harris would go for more? You kind of looking at, well, maybe we'll take a flyer on Lonnie Walker the fourth. And like there's no one. First of all, there's no one that they could realistically. They're not like Caleb Martin would be great for this team. I think they're not going to be able to afford him.
Yeah.
Um, could we see like I mean like maybe a Torian Prince, someone for them might make sense. Or I wonder how much his market. I don't know that he would do anything, but like if he was looking to kind of he's older, so maybe not. But if you had to accept the minimum or even let's say the mini MLE and you're Gordon Hayward, do they have enough reps to go around for you to think that, oh well, I want to try and like reinvent my value? That's probably a bet. they're in such a terrible situation. I think we both know we would strip it down and begin anew at this point, but it's such awkward territory if you're bringing all these guys back, and then you still have Ayo Dosunmu and Kobe White, who are guys that even if you were going to strip it down, you could make an argument for keeping. I wouldn't, because I don't think their trade value is ever going to be higher than it is now. But this team is like one of the least inspiring teams in the league right now.
Yeah, it's kind of almost good to get him out of the way first here. I think if you zoom all the way out, I think and you alluded to this, the likeliest outcome is that this Bulls team coming up is going to look quite a bit like the Bulls team we just finished watching. And like, that does not inspire me with great joy. Like, I can't imagine being a Bulls fan and thinking like, more than likely it's going to feel a lot like it's felt the last couple of years. And like, you're pinning a lot of hopes to like, oh, maybe Lonzo Ball can give us something, which is just like, we're all rooting.
I mean,
for
that'd
that.
be great, but even if he gives you something, it's not going to be 2000 and what? I mean, how long has it been? Was that 2020, 19, Lonzo? Well, whatever it was, that he's not going. That's not going to. Is that the player that you're getting back? And the answer is probably not.
No, I don't think so.
We should move on. How long would he put? So that was 2021 Lonzo Ball. Basically,
it was that glorious like first 30, 40 games of that year where the Bulls were leading the conference for a minute, and like, Lonzo Ball was the key to everything. And then that's really the last time this team was remotely interesting.
And look, if they do anything major, we'll react. Like, it's very quickly. I don't even want you to expound, and then we'll move on to Cleveland. Are the Bulls more likely to strip it down or to make a trade in which they are giving up draft equity to try and, like, I don't even want to call it beef up the window, but just like tread water or get their shoulders above water instead of just their neck?
Instead of the neck. Yeah. I think it's got to be more likely that they focus on the present as opposed to the future to answer the question. I think they're more likely to make a crazy.
And the real final one, over under 1.5 first round picks or the equivalent for Zach LaVine if they trade him.
Like real ones?
Like, I think they could be whatever picks, like top 25 protected. I'm just going to say,
I think over. I think over, but I would be really confident that at least one of them is going to be like a, just crazy protections on it. It's probably going to be seconds, or the ceiling on it's super low.
On to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are in. I mean, Donovan Mitchell is the pivot point. They do have Isaac Okoro's going into restricted free agency. Tristan Thompson's a free agent. They have so many top or seemingly top end guys. They're still like $10 million beneath the tax if we assume they're going to guarantee salaries for Sam Merrill and Craig Porter Jr. That's only if they renounce Isaac Okoro's free agent hold, which is $26.8 million. He's not going to get that much. So their spending power, I still think it's going to end up being the mini MLE, but a lot of it will rest on, well, how much does Okoro actually get, or do they keep him? If they don't keep him, or for some reason he just makes like money that's less than what would the non-taxpayer MLE would be, they would have machinations to then potentially access the full or the bigger MLE, which is valued at $12.9 million this year. That's a big difference from 5.2. And you could use that in a trade. That's another adjustment. Like, you could use it as a trade exception, basically. I'm going to say they're going to be a mini MLE team, though. In terms of extensions, we know Evan Mobley, his max for 4 years would be 173.7. 5-year max is 224.9. Donovan Mitchell is eligible for a 4-year, $208.5 million max extension. And then Jared Allen's also extension eligible. 3 years, $90.7 million would be the maximum that they could offer him. I guess, like, I think we need to just start with their current guys, and let's look at the extensions very quickly. Evan Mobley, because we know he will be there next year. He will sign an extension, would be my guess. Do you think that he's going to get, I don't even care about the years at this point. Do you think he's going to get a max?
I do. Okay. And I don't feel great about it. But I think you just sort of have to, as the Cavs, like, I think, and I don't want to like really downplay it. Like, I'm out on Evan Mobley. Like, that's far, far from the case. But he certainly hasn't, like, he's not at the level of like, well, Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton and even like LaMelo Ball, just like, yep, they're getting maxes. I don't know if that's quite the same for Mobley, but I do think he'll get one. Don't you? I mean, I don't know about the 5 years, but I think
I'd be surprised if he doesn't get the 5-year 225, basically.
Okay.
I'd be surprised. Maybe there's not a player option. I just think with the cap going up, these 25% maxes are going to look like those are the ones that I just feel like if the player is even fringe, and I don't consider him fringe, I'm probably a little bit higher on him than you. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of the functional ecosystem right now. But
Mhm.
if they're fringe, it's just as of right now, you just give it to them and you know that it'll age at least fairly well.
Yeah.
Jared Allen, we both agree, not signing that extension, right?
Probably not. Although like 30 a year on average for him sounds like a lot, but that again, I'm still anchored to the, I really we need to, not that we need to do this now, but like I'm going to have to make a full adjustment to percentages of the cap from now on, just instead of like talking about raw dollars. Cause doesn't 30 a year seem like a lot for him?
It would, but if the cap is going to be like, even if it's 150 at that point, by the time it kicks in or close to it,
Mhm.
20%
Right.
of the cap on Jared
Yeah.
Allen's fine with me.
Right. That's the thing. Like, I got to get over it. Yeah. I think, and well, really, like, and obviously Donovan Mitchell, like, the Cavs would be ecstatic if he signed that. I think the four
Well,
for
so that's
208.
but that's like that's going to dictate the rest of this
Right.
discussion. Is do you think it's going to be the max? I don't know if anyone's thinking he doesn't deserve the max, but it's going to be the max if he signs it. Do you think, based off the reporting, do you think he's going to sign that extension?
Well, I don't even know the state of the latest reporting. Correct me if I'm wrong. It sounded like there were whispers that like maybe he's inclined or whatever the verbiage was to accept that. Right. That's where we are right now.
It was like triple hedging, but Dan Gilbert had said something, and then there was reporting in The Athletic that signs are kind of pointing towards he will sign the extension.
I I'm still skeptical just because I think it's still easy enough for him to steer his way using the leverage of to steer his way to a team he wants to play for via trade, because he can use the leverage of I'm not signing an extension with you, Cleveland. And hey, other teams out there that I don't want to be traded to, I'm gonna explore 2025 free agency. So, maybe don't put your best offers on the table or understand I'm a rental. And the teams that he is willing to sign with, I think will be fairly understood. And he can say, you got to give up a lot, like that, like he can definitely direct himself. And to me, if I'm him, that's the route I would prefer to go, because maybe I get to end up on the Lakers, or maybe I get wherever, one of the New York teams, or I just have more control that way. I guess if you sign that extension, you can still demand a trade. Wouldn't be the first.
I
Uh,
I would sign it if I'm him. And I don't necessarily, I'm not saying that he's unhappy there or wants to leave, but if you're signing it, what you're basically just saying is, well, I'm going to give it one more year here and then I'll orchestrate my way to where I'd like to go. And if
yeah,
you have more than one team you'd like to go to, like if you're fine with the Lakers, the Nets, the Knicks, the Heat, then if the options are there, that'd be an even more inclination to sign it. And one of the reasons I do believe he'll sign it, maybe we should have mentioned this at the top, as we're recording this, they still don't have a head coach. The reporting makes it seem like James Borrego is kind of in line to get that job. I
mhm.
just don't think you fire JB Bickerstaff. I know other players weren't happy with him, but the reporting had Donovan Mitchell in particular
Yep,
frustrated with him. And I don't think if you make that move without having intel that Donovan Mitchell is going to sign the extension, that to me is like at least a little bit awkward, if not a super high end risk. And so my gut makes me feel like he's going to sign the extension.
yeah. No, that's good that we're having this discussion, because I was viewing it. I think that's a good case to make for it, because I was just viewing it as like maybe like almost impatiently. Like the way I think of Mitchell with the Cavs is like he didn't choose to be there. We've never been able to divorce his presence there from whispers that he's going to be somewhere else, in short order, and maybe wants to be. And so I'm thinking like, okay, it's time to go now, because from Cleveland's perspective, like, you can't risk losing him for nothing in free agency. You can't risk giving him the lever. But like if he just signs it, you're right. He can just, maybe this was a one more year, no matter what situation, and he locks up that money. He can go wherever he wants after the fact. I guess I wasn't thinking of it in those terms. So you would bet on him signing it, and you would bet, well,
And
then there's the,
the other reason that makes me think he's going to sign it is the fact that it was in that report that Clutch Sports Group and Darius Garland would consider asking for a trade if he did sign it. You don't put that out there unless you think that he's going to sign the extension.
good point. So that was my next question: is where's Darius? What are you doing with Darius Garland
Well,
now?
I think we have to look at it this way. We both know Evan Mobley is going to be back. If you had to guess, I'm going to say Donovan Mitchell is back.
Okay.
Do you think Donovan Mitchell is going to be back?
I'm not as confident as you are.
Well, let's frame it in the over-unders then, because we know there's nothing to expound upon with Darius Garland. It's if Donovan Mitchell signs the extension, he might ask for a trade. He has multiple years left on his current deal, so he doesn't have a ton of leverage. I'm gonna be pretty high about this. 3.5 over under of the core four being back in Mitchell, Allen, Mobley, and Garland. So I'm gonna if you're taking the under, if you think one of them is gonna be gone.
Yeah, it has to be the under, I think.
Oh, I'm taking the over.
So you think all four are back?
I want because and we haven't really talked about what this team still needs,
right?
Because their actual at the top is so polarizing. What could happen? Yes, they do need probably like more diverse front court play. If you want to lead into those, one big plus a minimum of 3 to 4 shooter lineups, they could use some two-way wings. It does feel like Max Strus can be solid. Isaac Okoro is a great regular season player, but it always feels like they're making concessions on those wing spots with the players they have. I don't know that I see the Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell trade that's going to address, or excuse me, Darius Garland or Jared Allen trade. Those would be the guys that I think would be most likely be traded. I'm that not confident, but I firmly believe that Donovan Mitchell will be back for at least another year. And so at that point, it's, well, shouldn't we kind of see what they're like if they could get healthier together under a new coach who maybe comes in and pitches Darius Garland on, this is how I'll make the two guard thing work. And then it's just, you're so talented at the top. It makes more sense to futz and fiddle in, oh, can we figure out a way? And they can trade for Dorian Finney-Smith, or can we get Gary Harris on the free agent market to make those types of changes and see what you have with this group. And the only way that I think that actually changes is if Donovan Mitchell says, no, I'm not signing the extension, because then it's, okay, well, Donovan Mitchell has to go. You can't afford to let next season play out.
Yeah. I guess I view it as you're just not going to keep both guards. I'm putting a lot of stock in the either or framing of like the Garland trade request coming on the heels of a Mitchell extension. So that's how I'm going under the 4. The other thing, it's hard to unring the bell on the Jared Allen stuff. Like all the, that really extensive report that, was pretty unfair to him. I think some of the stuff that came out about how teammates were not cool with him not, taking pain-killing injections and malingering or whatever the case is. So I think it's got to be under that. But also because if you're trying to address what they actually need, I think moving Jared Allen, some formulation of a Jared Allen for Brandon Ingram trade, I think makes some sense. And
is what they need another ball. So what is Evan Mobley the 4th option on offense all of a sudden?
Right. It's just the theory of we got to get somebody in there at the 3-4, and Ingram is eminently available, it seems like, and is fairly low risk because of the expiring contract. But then you run into well, what are we going to let him hit free agency and lose him for nothing in 2025? There's a lot of, subsequent decisions that would need to be made. If you're giving me over under 3.5, I'm saying under. But that might just be 3, just because I think I think it's Mitchell or Garland. It's hard for me based on what we've seen and heard to believe both will be back.
It's so tough to spot a wing for big trade. I know the Pelicans have a ton of wings, but I don't like Brandon Ingram there. Dyson Daniels is intriguing, but he's not what Cleveland needs. So now you're talking about roping in a third team because they're not giving you Trey Murphy or Herb Jones, both of whom would be fantastic fits in Cleveland. And so that stuff gets hard to spot. And so you either need to find a third team that could send them stuff they want, or is there another just, big for wing trade that's not really out there. And it's even just a team like OKC, you could play Jared Allen and Chet together, but why are you going that route? Why are you giving up all the assets it would take to get Jared Allen? So the part of that just might be born from maybe there's fewer options than we think, or it's, are you trying to break up Jared Allen? Because Jared Allen for what? Robert Williams III and Matisse Thybulle, does that really do anything for you? You're not really addressing the shooting. RW3 is a backup big. That gets super interesting. You can't really play. I mean, I guess you could play him and Mobley together for certain minutes if you wanted to. I just find the lack of alternatives, I guess, maybe I'm just not being inventive enough to think about it, though. But I think it's fair to say, well, one of these guys won't be there. I think that's totally fair when you look at kind of all the pivot points that they're at.
Yeah. All right. We got anything else on Cleveland?
How much would you pay Okoro? I did the over-unders with Brian Toporek, and I think I set his at 12.8 million. So 100,000 below the non-taxpayer. Do you think that he gets that? I think he does. I'd be a little bit surprised if he doesn't, actually.
I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like I've had any of the questions answered about, well, I think we do. So far, the answers aren't good.
He's a valuable regular season player who, without fail, is going to become not just less valuable, but sometimes borderline unplayable in the postseason.
That's exactly it. Like, I guess maybe it depends on the team. Maybe if like you don't anticipate playing games at like the absolute highest stakes, level, then the stuff about him being an iffy playoff guy doesn't matter as much to you. And you care about getting from 40 to 50 wins. Like, he can help you do that. And that might be, those are the types of teams often that have the full MLE to give. So, I mean, obviously that's a good number because you said it, use it as the over under. My gut says under that. But he is still
Okay.
young enough to where like he could, if he adds like 2 more attempts a game and can hold from deep and can hold, in the mid 30s, like, I think maybe that is enough justification for a mid-level esque salary.
I will say if they're not going to be trading any of their core four, like you need to kind of be hawking this year's first attached to a salary to be like, well, what can we get for
Mhm.
this? Like to improve the two-way play on the wings or just to make us more, I would say, offensively diverse when we're at our peak. And I mean, I keep coming back to the Dorian Finney-Smith name, whereas like the George Niang salary plus that first round pick basically get you there, I believe. I'd probably do that if I'm Cleveland. He has 2 years left on his deal. I guess one of which is a player option. There's a chance he picks it up. So like they're not out of I wouldn't put my 2031 first round pick in play unless it's just I'm trying to think of the player that it would take for me to do that. But they're even if they do have to trade one of their core four, they're still in a relatively good position because you're probably looking at the odds of them trading more than one of these guys is pretty low, right?
I would say to me, it's more likely they trade 2 than 0. I,
Oh,
I
we
think.
got to revisit that. That's an interesting framing
Or
for it.
or yeah, I guess it would have to be a trade because they're all technically under contract, even though Mitchell, it feels like he's somehow a free agent practically. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just I think if we'd had this conversation like a month ago or like shortly after, whenever the Cavs postseason run ended, don't you think you would have been more inclined to say this is getting blown up to whatever that means? This is going to be undergo significant changes.
Probably, but I
Yeah.
feel maybe I've overthought it, or would that have been me being like prisoner of the moment? If we
That's the
had,
thing. I'm still kind of prisoner of that moment. I haven't let that moment go.
I am gonna laugh when their biggest free agent signing is Marcus Morris. So that's just the return of Marcus Morris. You want to
Man.
take us to our next team, which is the good old Detroit Pistons.
Good old Detroit Pistons. So Simone Fontecchio, Malachi Flynn, and James Wiseman are all restricted free agents. All three will not be back. We can
Well, let's
talk
do
about
let's do this very quickly. I don't feel like we need to rattle off all the criteria right off the bat. So Fontecchio, I'm gonna set his over under for you at 12.8 million. You should
over.
get more than that, right?
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
getting
Okay.
more than that. You worry about the small sample and like he's not in his what is he 28? Like he's definitely not someone you price in a bunch of improvement for. But like the defense and the shooting is gonna like if Okoro gets more than Fontecchio, I guess I would just say whoever wound up with Fontecchio got like a screaming deal. That's how I would frame that one, just to compare to the last team.
Wow,
So
Fontecchio's almost 29. He's a little
yeah,
bit older, but like for 3 years, 4 years, that's fine.
whatever. Yeah, at mid-level ish money, maybe a little more. You could justify like 2 years for 50 for him or something like
What?
that. I think like just whatever. Get his age 29 and 30
He's
seasons,
getting
and
that Kobe legacy deal, apparently,
yeah,
according to
whatever.
Grant.
Oh God, what was the Kobe legacy deal? It was like two
Was
for
it 2 and
48.
48 and a half or
Yeah,
something?
God, different times. So Detroit has a heaping pile of cap space, about 64 million. If they renounce all their own free agents, and except for Fontecchio, and if they decline Evan Fournier's team option, which will be a sad day when we can no longer talk about Evan Fournier's team option. It's been a
Imagine they pick it up to keep the
hot
salary
topic.
slot for a trade.
I mean, I floated that when something I wrote, and I just don't know if I fully believed it, but it's like you could. I mean, it wouldn't be the.
Well,
It
because
wouldn't be the.
we don't see like the one. I guess they could sign these bloated 1+1 deals where it's, but like you normally see, like they could go the Bruce Brown route, but like you could also just be like, okay, well, Evan Fournier, we know it's expiring. It's 17 million. So if we're not gonna the other thing here is how do we price in that Trajan Langdon is running the show instead of Troy Weaver? And it seems like with Fred Vincent coming on, which by the way, I'm going to predict right now that's their biggest free agency addition is getting
Yeah.
Fred Vincent in Detroit. Um, like it makes it seem like Monty Williams is going to be there for next season. So I just have this inkling that they're going to slow play this a little bit more. And so I don't know, you're going to have to spend your cap space because of the new salary floor rules, but I don't think, whereas before, if you thought Weaver was going to be involved or let alone or be the actual lead basketball executive, anything was on the table. And yes,
Mhm.
there are still guys where if OG Anunoby said, for some reason, the Knicks and the Sixers won't give me the max, will you? Well, yeah, you fucking sign OG Anunoby, but I don't think that this is going to be a team that's throwing money at these. Everyone had Tobias Harris
Right.
penciled in there, and I don't think this is going to be a team that's going to act in that vein anymore.
I hope not. I think they need to be, and it's funny, like, I mean, really, we can get into whichever other, minutia on the outline you want to talk about, but I do think the Weaver to Langdon switch is just like, it is the biggest variable because, we've talked about, well, does that mean it's like, I think the analogy I've been thinking about is just like Langdon's moving into a new house, and it's like it was redecorated like 6 months ago, and it's all new. All this stuff is still new, but like he didn't pick it. It's not to his taste. So is he gonna just toss it all out and start again, or is he gonna like live with it for a while and kind of see how it feels? Like I think you could justify either situation, especially if you're building out the coaching staff, you're trying to make tweaks that don't affect the roster directly. Like I don't know. I think that is the real pivot of Detroit's offseason is like, is Langdon gonna just he's not married to Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Isaiah Stewart, like not his guys. Does he say, screw it, I'm gonna move everything I can. I want picks. This is year zero of the new rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
Or is he gonna say, like, well, some of these, is there somewhere in the middle? Can we keep one or two of these guys? I think that's just everything else we talk about. You have to view through that prism. It's just like we don't know what Trajan Langdon wants to do. And it's a weird takeover. It's a weird
Yeah.
situation because like the rebuild has been going on and it's just like not working. It's not like you got bloated veteran salaries like you get in some situations like this. It's a very unusual circumstance.
I would be surprised though if he moves Jaden, Duran, Asar. But Cade's not going anywhere. Like you can't, the person you're hiring that had to be under the guys like Cade is staying here. By the way, he's the most notable extension eligible guy here, and his it's the same, like the 4-year max would be 173.7 and then 5 years 224.9. I again expect him to get the 5 years and 224.9. Maybe he doesn't get a player option. But I would be, maybe that's a decision they make mid-season with some of these other guys, but I would expect the other three, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, and Jaden Ivey, to still be in Detroit.
Yeah, I guess like the argument in support of that is I don't know if Langdon takes this job if he's, if he hates everybody there. If he's
True.
like, I want, like what, like imagine like, yeah, I'll take the job, except I don't like any of the players on the roster.
And by the way, the only one of them, I know Asar Thompson's jumper isn't good, and just Jalen Duren did not grow the way you wanted to, but how much of that was the context under which Detroit season took place? But like the only one that you can reasonably look at and be like, is Jaden Ivey is the one that kind of like foments this sense of, I don't want to say disgust. That's not fair to him, but just intense skepticism.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot more like, oh no, this really might not work with him. Like you can at least squint at the other guys, and you don't even have to squint. Like at Cunningham, he's just actually. I found myself surprised by feeling better about like no brainer max for Cunningham than I did about Mobley, even though I kind of like Mobley better in some ways. But he's like a wing that can handle the ball and score and distribute. It's just like, yeah, you just that's the
Shot
guy.
42.9% of the step back threes last year.
Yeah,
He's getting the max.
He's the player type that gets the money.
Would you agree though that I think, and maybe there's opportunities out there, especially with the second apron penalties kicking in, for them to get draft equity and prospects by taking on some bad deals, but like you're not going to get compensated to take on Zach LaVine. And so it's just, what are the deals out there that you think teams might be, the Clippers might give you something to take on PJ Tucker. It's not going to be like a first round pick. So my point is, I think they should be aggressive with their cap space. And I don't have a problem with them going after guys who aren't necessarily young. It's can they help streamline the development of the players you care about most in your organization? And if you don't want to consider Cade's a developmental arc anymore, it's can they just fit alongside those guys? So just names I'm thinking of, and I'll throw them at you one by one and see if you like any of them. Caleb Martin would be interesting here.
Oh yeah, I love that because he's not taking anything off the table from any of your young guys.
You know who would be interesting, but the whole Jaden Ivey thing makes it awkward? Emmanuel Quickly. would be like they would be a team if they didn't have Jaden Ivey on the roster. I'd be in the bag. I know then you're paying him and Cade, but that's not actually a problem. So
yeah.
obviously, if OG or Paul George wanted to come, fine, let them come. So when you're looking at, I'll first see it this way: would you prefer to have whatever it's going to take to get him Isaiah Hartenstein? So like you're probably having to give him like a bunch of money a year, and then trade Isaiah Stewart, or would you rather kind of keep the front court set up as it is, and we'll sign a cheaper like other additional type of big?
I think I'd rather have Hardenstein. I just don't know. I don't know what the theory of a really good team with Stewart as a starter is. Not that he's necessarily being paid like he has to be a starter, but again, more prisoner of the moment. I know Hardenstein can really make teammates better and add a ton of value as a starting center. I don't feel like I know that about Stewart.
I still wouldn't expect them to spend a ton of money on a big man. I do feel like we have to mention Miles Bridges here. If I don't know, it feels like they're less likely to take a look at him with Trajan Langdon there because there's going to be less urgency to make them move where it's like, oh, this has to move our needle now. But I do feel like they're among the teams that are going to be linked to him.
A Bridges acquisition, like while the guy's a good player, still feels more like a semi-desperate move, and like Langdon should have zero desperation just because he's got. I mean, Weaver probably thought this too, but Langdon probably imagines he has a pretty long runway. I hope that's been made clear to him. So I don't think that's a move to make.
I think they need shooting this much to get to a point where you can just easily unlock. I'm just going to consider Cade a shooter. Like, could we just get more or even if it's 3 shooter lineups with their Star Thompson and Jalen Duren on the court? So just like they should be looking at Buddy Hield. They should be looking at Klay Thompson. If he's actually a flight risk to leave, you could look at a reunion with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope if you wanted to on even, I don't want to say lower scales, but lower scales than KCP. But like Gary Trent Jr. is a free agent. They could be a team that might be interested in Gary Harris, Malik Beasley. They should look at him. Like those are all like, that's kind of where I'm at with them is let's just surround. It doesn't need to be anyone who's like super game changing. I do love Caleb Martin here, even though he's not much of a shooter, but like those are the types of players that I think that they should really target the most.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You have anything else on them? Or I guess I could see Isaiah Stewart getting traded this summer. That feels like something where it's what if OKC decides not to give Hartenstein all the money, or he goes to New York, and it's do they just give you a first round pick for Isaiah Stewart? And it's like the least favorable of one of their 87 2025 first round picks.
Yeah, I could see that too. We didn't talk like, do you think Fontecchio is back? Like that's
they gave up like a not insignificant second to get him, and he's a restricted free agent, right? So it's why like what is the plan? I mean, I guess you could say a previous regime made it. So there is that, but
that's why I ask is you just never know how.
Would you throw any of your, even if it's just to fuck with the Bulls ultimately, throw any just like aggressive offer of Patrick Williams?
So I was, as you were talking, I was like skimming all the restricted free agents on the thinking of like, who could Detroit, like whose day could Detroit ruin, just with an offer sheet. But then like, whether it's Williams or somebody else, do you really want to tie up? I know the wait period isn't quite as long anymore. I think that's changed where the match time, the time a team has to match is a little shorter.
48 hours now instead of 72, I think it was.
So like it's not as big of a commitment to do something like that. I kind of feel like Detroit would rather just be like, if we're going to sign a guy, we want to have actually signed him as opposed to just waiting for that to get matched. Cause you do tie up your money.
Couldn't it work the other way? Because you're going to kind of know a better lay of the land, because now that you can negotiate with your own players after the finals are over, you're going to kind of have an idea of who will actually still be available. And so if it doesn't look like, if all these guys are going back to their teams, and maybe it's even reported that like, oh, Buddy Hield's going back to the Sixers, Clay staying with the whoever. And if it like, even if it's just 22, 25 million a year, which sounds like a lot for Patrick Williams, and it is, I would consider it. I don't know that you want to bring another he's a fine shooter, but it's in low volume. But I actually don't. I mean, could you imagine the defense if it's Sar Thompson, Patrick Williams, and then just having Cade's size there? Like the lineups you could build out from that spot are pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, but to put a bow on the restricted thing, like quickly, like Maxey, he's what we don't need to discuss him. Quickly, Fontecchio, Williams, like Toppin,
Toro, those aren't.
There's not. I mean, it's pretty slim pickings in the restricted market, which is rare. It feels rare. It feels like usually there's at least one or two that you have to like. Oh,
would you actually look at? You kind of made me think of something. Would you look at bringing in a veteran they tried to do this with Monte Morris and it didn't pan out. But like a Tyus Jones, just to pay him a lot of money over 2 years to kind of bring in that veteran organizer who could play with or without Cade, with or without Jaden, technically.
Yeah, maybe. I think like, although, yeah, I guess as a backup, but then if you do that, it's like Jaden Ivey might as well like start packing, just because it's fairly clear that he's not a huge, because normally you'd be like, well, Ivey's going to start, and if he's not starting, he's going to play 34 minutes. I don't know. I'm not saying that'd be the right or wrong decision. I'm just saying like that would be my assumption is, oh, Ivey's not going to be around, but you never know.
Our next team we are on to is the Indiana Pacers. Look at us just slaying the alphabet at this point. Notable free agents include Doug McDermott and Pascal Siakam. Jalen Smith has a player option, I think, for about 5.4. And then Obi Toppin is a restricted free agent. Their salary cap situation is, I guess it's fairly fluid, but if we pencil in, let's start here. Pascal Siakam is getting the max, I would assume. Do you think it's going to be a 4 or a 5 year max?
Do I think it's going to be? I think it should be the 4, because that's the most Indiana has to go up to sort of win the bidding war. I would say if it's 5, it won't be the max. Is that a sufficient like hemming and hawing answer?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. So it's, by the way, 4 year max for anyone listening is 189.5 for him from the Pacers specifically. 5 year max is 245.3. I'm going to go ahead and predict he gets the 5 year max. I just think you gave up the equity for him. It's going to be framed as the cap is rising. That he's a player, won't have as many options as Paul George, but the Sixers, if they strike out on others, might just be like, all right, we know Nick Nurse is here. Like, that's fine. Like, we'll make it work with Siakam and Embiid. But again, you can only give 4 years. So I get to your point where 5 years at the sub max, but how much money, like, is it, and how much of a difference is it really? Like, oh, well, right. 5 for 230 is just like so close to the full max.
I do think like, so I wouldn't love it if it was the full max for 5, but then you step back and say like, well, he's your second star. He's been an all NBA player twice. Like that's just what those cost. Like it's a rare situation where a good team, which Indiana is now, has a second best player.
Yep.
That isn't a max guy. So it's just like, and Siakam, I think we would both agree if Siakam is your best player making the max, like you're not great as a team, probably. But if he's your second best guy, like that's better than a lot of teams' second best players. I don't know. I'm just trying to justify in my own mind. Like if I'm getting out ahead of like my feelings about the 5-245 deal.
I think their actual most ideal situation. I know it takes him an extra year, but if it is 5 years at the sub max, that might be their most ideal, is to just have him under contract for as long as possible. And I know maybe he wants to get back into free agency sooner when he's a 10 plus year veteran eligible for that higher salary. But I think that stars, as they get into their mid to late 30s, are going to be in for reality checks on how much teams double or hesitate to give them max money or near max money. So for him, just kind of like sew up. If they're going to give you the 5 year full boat, take it now. And I think they would. They gave up, it's not a ton in retrospect to get him, but it was still 3 first round picks. You can't just let that walk like up, or you don't want to rankle him by trying to like, because at what point, how much money per year are you ultimately haggling over? If it's a matter of, we just don't want him on the books for 5 years, that's a different story then. Okay, it's cool if you can get him for 5 and 220, but $25 million over the life of the deal is like $4 or $5 million a year.
If you're Siakam, would you rather have 5 for 245 or the max with like 3+1, where you get that player option on the 4th year and get back?
Honestly, maybe he's thinking differently. I want give me the 5 for 245.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what I'd want.
So if we're gonna pencil, I think we both agree that he will be at or very much near the max for next year's books. So when you pencil that in, they're basically right at the tax line if you keep Obi's cap hold, which is $20.4 million. And that I assume Jalen Smith opts out, and that they're going to guarantee TJ McConnell's deal, which they will absolutely do. They will be over the tax line. I mean, if Jalen Smith starts opting in, but I think this leads into an interesting discussion though, of how much are you giving Obi Toppin? I'm not giving him his cap hold.
No way.
he's not making that, right?
Yeah, I think he's another over under mid level guy. Like not they don't have the mid level, but like 12, 13, because he's not a starter. He's limited in the playoffs. Like I think, and they should care about the playoffs. Although like he did have moments for sure, like changed some games with his runouts. Um, I can't get to 20. Like 15 is probably like the upper
That's what
limit.
I feel like he's going to get more than, because it work this way. It always seems like with players is you can't identify where they're actually going to go. Who's going to give him the offer sheet? Honestly,
Mhm.
who? And yet they're still going to get, it doesn't feel like the team actually squeezed them. So I would think he gets more than the mid-level, but I'd be pretty shocked if it's more than 15.
Yeah, I would agree. If he gets 20, if he gets that cap hold number 20, like it would almost have to be like a 1+1 for me to like feel very good about, or something like that. It's just you can't, I don't know, you can't commit that much to a guy that is just never ever going to start for you.
Right. And so they're just like, they're so up against it that their best spending tool is going to be the mini MLE. I wonder if they would like, is this a team? I can't picture them going into the tax next year. And so if you're bringing back Obi and you're bringing back Siakam, if Jalen Smith opts out, I predict that he leaves at that point. But if he's going to come back, like, is this a team? Like, forget about adding anyone. If they're going to be in the tax to keep this core together next year, they're getting out of it, right? They're not. They're not sticking in. I don't think they're on that much of an urgent timeline. That's not something it feels like they've necessarily telegraphed.
Can I? So, well, how about this though? You're going to lock up your second max star in Siakam here. Like, I think the way this team gets very expensive and slightly more unwieldy, which would make some sense because Siakam is not, Siakam is in the middle slash probably nearing like the downside years of his prime, I think.
Right.
So like, when do we start talking about bundling up Neesmith, Matherin, and Walker and whatever to go get a third star? Like, is because that, I don't know how likely that is, but that is definitely one way this team gets like pretty seriously into some financial issues, but like
Well,
maybe that's worth it because the window is maybe now, as young as Halliburton is, it's kind of weirdly tied to Siakam's age.
Well, yeah. So I doubt they would go after a star, but I mean, Mikal Bridges, if they could get him, sure, just because of his number. But it doesn't seem. I mean, when Pacers fans in our comments think it's malpractice to trade either Jarris or Benedict Mathurin, apparently, which I just don't. I've seen a lot of people think that you should trade Nemhard more than Mathurin because Nemhard's harder to fit alongside Halliburton. I just disagree
I
because
strongly
Nemhard
disagree.
is ultimately, even if the offensive fit is awkward, and I don't know if Caitlin Cooper spoke on this. I'm sure I'd be curious to know her thought. Obviously, shocker. Dan wants to know what Caitlin Cooper thinks about the Pacers. Like the stuff he could do to insulate Tyrese defensively. So I'm not saying that you just need to go trade Benedict Mathurin for Dorian Finney-Smith. That's not what I'm saying. But like, if you're this team, you do need to be, that needs to be on the table. Him and Jarris Walker can't be viewed as just, because first of all, the stuff you need, which I would just argue is wing defense at this point, like that's just the biggest need. If you want to diversify a little bit of your ball handling ranks, okay, fine. But like your biggest need, Benedict Mathurin doesn't address, and maybe Jarris Walker does, but how are you using, like, it just, you're not going to play him with Siakam and Turner a bunch. That's not his long-term arc. And if that ends up panning out, then I'll be wrong. So you have to be looking at, I think, the trade market here and the kind of the other stuff looming over, so that we touch on it. Isaiah Jackson is extension eligible. TJ McConnell's extension eligible. I would say he doesn't get one, right? Like he can sign, I think it's 4 years and 58.3, unless the league, he's in a weird territory where like the league's average annual salary can make it weird. I might offer it because he becomes an interesting, but like that's not one. The Nemhard one, that's the 4 for 78 number when you're estimating the league's annual salary. Is that like, one, do you think they'll offer it? And two, if you're Nemhard, are you taking it?
Man, I really like Nemhard. I think, and he makes so much sense as like either a running mate or a third guard with Halliburton and whoever else there. I think I definitely offer that. And I think if I'm the Pacers, I think I hope he takes it. Um, and like, honestly, I think he might, oh man, I think it's more likely that the Pacers offer it and he says no than like, than, then he takes it. Don't you? Like, I don't know. I don't know what I think. I think you got to offer it. And I think you should feel good about it if he takes it, if you're Indiana.
I don't know. I think you should offer it. I don't know if he would take it. I think he would. Because a part of the assumption would be, are they one paying him earlier, or are they trying to like not have it kick in until 2026, 2020? Because he has a team option for 25, 26. So I just I'm offering it, and I think he takes it. But that does get into the exercise though of it. This doesn't really impact our cap situation for next year, of course. But like, okay, well, what are we doing here? Because now Nemhard's going to be on the books for a bunch of money, along with Halliburton and Siakam. Miles Turner is going to be a free agent after next season. I think there is a weird there does need to be some semblance of urgency here from the Pacers, but they're just I don't think they're going to be a team that goes, well, we need to go all in and go after Mikal Bridges, or if there's another just wing type that intrigues you on the trade market. And because like they're spicy, they're not going to address their biggest need, even if they're willing to use the mid-level exception. I just don't even know who the best player is that they'd be able to sign for that. But like there's no one that's just going to resolve that issue for you. So it has to happen via trade, just given the way your books are set up. And like you could go lower level, not that he's a bad player, but like Dorian Finney-Smith would be another name to throw out here. Like you could get a player of that caliber where it doesn't exhaust a ton of your assets. So like maybe that's the route they should go, and then see, well, let's see what it's like when Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam aren't maybe broken up by injury, like stop and start, and then they get to go through a whole training camp together. And we could see how all these different pieces end up working.
Yeah, I guess like maybe before we move on, I want to, because I get it. Like Pacers fans, like they like their young guys. It's always hard to just move on. You know, you always overvalue your favorite team's own young players and undervalue acquisitions. Like I feel like a weird maybe more urgency than I do in a lot of other situations towards like, yeah, maybe go do the Bridges thing if you can, or whatever the other equivalent like big swing would be. Bridges is just perfect because he's the wing defender. Like I just don't know how else you could get someone quite that good other than trading Mathurin, Walker, whatever. So it's got as much to do with like I think the Pacers core just between Halliburton and Siakam and some of the role guys like Nesmith, Nemhard, and then Nesmith, you probably trade him, Turner. Like I think it's good enough to where it justifies like let's go. And then on the other side of it, like I don't love Mathurin as a fit next to Halliburton long term. I don't see how that works by the time you actually have to pay Mathurin what he's maybe going to command. And Walker, like who knows what? Like we saw zero basically. So it's both sides. The urgency is built on like I think this team is good now and should try to get better. And I don't love like I don't see the like, oh, but wait until these young guys catch up and then we'll get it from both sides. Like the young guys are developing, the older guys are still really good. Like I don't think with Siakam's timeline specifically, I don't see that as realistic.
Just so that we mentioned some names here, they would be, because they also, whoever they acquire, you also want to make sure that they're not going to break your bank like within the next 2 years, probably, where you're trying to figure everything else. Like a Denny Avdia, I don't think Washington should trade him, but maybe if you're putting Nemhard in the table for that deal plus first round equity, and then however you would need to make the money work, that's something you can look at. We mentioned Jaden McDaniels as a pipe dream if Minnesota was looking to cut costs immediately, but we both know that he's not, I don't even think the second most likely player to be dealt in that scenario. Could they look at, if you're talking free agents, I don't know, he's a little small, but DeAnthony Melton, would you even have the money to go get him? Robert Covington's kind of cooked. Like they're in such an awkward price range when you're like first of all, I don't even know if they're going to like dangle the mini MLE to anybody either, which makes it super tough. And then Torian Prince that's unspectacular. He's not going to solve. We're talking about wanting to get some defense in there. Jeremy Grant would be a fascinating fit, but he's just so expensive when you're looking at having to make the salaries work. The same thing with Andrew Wiggins. And then it's like, well, now we actually have to move actual stuff to get him. And his value is not at a point where we'd want to do that. I might be more interested in what does it take to get Moses Moody out of Golden State in that scenario. Jayshawn Tate could be someone that might help you a little bit. He's not going to give you a ton of offense, but he's still hold up defensively. Any names or free agents or anything like that spring to mind?
I think it would take a significant like backcourt reshuffling, and this might be something you do after a trade sends out Mathurin, and maybe you do something with McConnell too. Like that's hard to imagine, but like you could definitely bargain shop for the Chris Dunns and Dennis Smith Juniors of the world if you're looking for someone that you could feasibly pair with Halliburton to just go guard somebody. Both of those guys I would anticipate being minimum signings. But yeah, I don't like that. If we're talking about signing minimum reserve guards, it means like something else pretty major has changed, because as it is, your backcourt is basically set. You've got 4 guys, including Mathurin, that have minutes, just, like real minutes set aside for them.
My final note here is I'm just curious. This might be for many teams to ask what it would take to get Toumani Camara out of Portland. That would be, they can handle sort of the lack of shooting from him, and he can guard, I want to say every position, but he can guard a lot of positions, and that would be like a very fascinating pull for them.
That would be.
Final team.
Milwaukee Bucks. Here we go. I mean, this might be quick. So they've got some free agents. Thanasis Antetokounmpo is a free agent, injured, as well as like just he's comes back on the minimum with them and probably nowhere else. Patrick Beverley, Jay Crowder, Danilo Gallinari, Malik Beasley's the big one.
He's gone.
He's gone. Like he just
and if he does, they're going to get fined for tampering.
Right, because it'll be a promise of
we'll pay you next year.
1 year deal. When we have full bird, we'll go big. We'll Nick Batum it. That's the most prominent one. Nick Batum with the Clippers, where he signed the short termer and then he got a longer deal after that.
But it was like, and it was kind of just more debatable about what his value was. But after the season Malik Beasley has, and the fact that he could have gotten more than the minimum last year, you kind of like, he wasn't just waived like Nick Batum was.
Started 77 games, shot 41% from 3. Like that
held
guy
up defensively against some bigger players better than I thought. I know the Bucks were a nightmare a lot of the times on that end of the floor, but point is he's gone.
He's gone. And the kicker is, you need to replace him with someone better than him. I think, if you really want to make any noise as the Bucks, right? Because like, you've been much better about giving him credit defensively than I have. Like, you still got to have somebody that's going to shut down the guys Damian Lillard can't guard, which is like everybody at the 1 or the 2. So you need an improvement on Beasley, probably. The best way to do that is packaging what they can trade 24 and like 31. They're 24 first on draft night and 2031.
We get to get into this minutia of
second apron stuff.
There's a sweet spot because they're technically not a second apron team, which is my biggest question for them. They will get there if you're going to just filling out their roster. They have, this is so difficult to frame because I have so many questions of it. They could go the route of, we're just going to operate as a second apron team. Do we maybe give Jay Crowder more money than Jay Crowder's worth because they have his bird rights, just so we have a salary slot to move because we can't aggregate players? Or are we willing to trade Bobby Portis or Pat Connaughton, so we don't think we need that slot? Or, and I feel like this hasn't really been talked about, is there like, this is an example, like $3 million without factoring in any additions, $3 million away from the apron. Would you compensate a team, and what does it take to just get rid of Pat Connaughton? And so now all of a sudden it's, okay, we can use the mini MLE and we can aggregate salaries and trades. What's more valuable to you?
Well, then you've got to game out what salaries are you aggregating, because in getting rid of Connaughton, you just dumped one that you would want to aggregate, right? So now it's Bobby Portis at 12.6 million in 24-25 salary.
You can use the first round pick and then Marjon Beauchamp in theory, unless one of those needs to go out to get rid of Connaughton.
Now, could you pump up Crowder's salary and time this right while you're getting off Connaughton somewhere else,
and then trade Crowder at the deadline, or
package? Put Portis and Crowder's new number together. You'd have to do it later. Yeah. I mean, there's a little, you know what? I'm glad we're talking about this, because I really did view the Bucks as like Phoenix East in the just total inflexibility. And that's not quite right. There's like a little, little wiggle room through, but realistically, I mean, so what would you, this is a great approach that you've come up with here that I have not heard before. Like, how realistic?
So that's like a thing. It wasn't just me. I guess I'm sure it's out there. There's no way we had like, this is the first time anyone's ever wondered if the Bucks won't be a first apron team. But I honestly think, look, because there's a chance we just haven't seen, if it's not going to cost you a first round pick to get rid of Pat Connaughton. And if it does, then we move on. But if it was like, the difference of, I probably would go the route of staying under the second apron, because I think it opens up more optionality for you, where you could view it as this way. We gave up whatever it took to get rid of Pat Connaughton. We're bringing in a first round pick, and we're bringing in someone we signed with the mini MLE, and then the chance to make a bigger upgrade at the deadline. Yes, you're delaying it, but like, because you were dealing with so many injuries last year, not to mention the head coaching change, going from Budenholzer to Adrian Griffin to Doc Rivers. There, Joe Prunty was there in between as well too. So, and you have like you've revamped your assistant staff. It's not outside the realm of possibility that you're just better as currently constructed. So if you can go that route, and again, it's not costing you a ton of equity, I might prefer the ceiling of just, oh, we can combine salaries and do X. Now, the flip side of this would be Bobby Portis is extension eligible himself. And if you view Bobby Portis as we need to keep him, then this is moot. Like if you want to 4 years and 78.9 about is his max. If that's the, I'm not saying they should pay him that. I wouldn't. I want to make that clear. I tend to be lower on Bobby Portis than Bucks fans.
Same.
But if you want to keep him, well, then this is a moot point. Just operate as the and if you do just cut costs, it's not, maybe it is so you could use the mini MLE, but you cut costs that you stayed under the second. That's what you did. But I would prefer the optionality of don't extend Bobby. And then I would try to stay under the second apron, use the mini MLE. I don't know. Again, this also matters who's the best player you could get with the mini MLE, but is it also the difference of, let's say you could get a Chris Dunn in here. Maybe you give him a little bit more than the minimum because perhaps there'd be more playing time available elsewhere, or he'd be guaranteed more playing time. That's also how you could view the mini MLE in those situations. So I think that is the route that I would go if you could. And then if you're making a bigger move, you're waiting until the middle of the season because like, as of right now, what is the biggest move that you would in theory be passing on? If we assume that they're not trading Bobby Portis or even I've seen Brook Lopez floated out there. Who are you breaking? How are you better after a Brook Lopez trade?
Right, because he's only making 23. So like
you could get this is interesting if he was healthy, but then you're losing the floor spacing at the 5. But like remember what if you sent Brook Lopez to New Orleans and New Orleans said, you know what, we'll give up Dyson Daniels and a first to Portland, and then they will give you Tamani Kamara, Tybal, and Robert Williams III. I don't even know if that's like, yeah, that really does a lot of things for the Bucks defense, but now you've compromised a lot of your spacing on offense. And I'm not even sure if New Orleans would do that. I want to make it clear, but that's just right off the top of my head, a framework but like, where's the Brook Lopez trade where you come out of it with 2 players that 2 make you better?
This is always the problem with these second apron and second apron adjacent teams is like, once your aggregation options are limited, it's just like, well, how does trading this guy for 2 lesser players make us better? That's always the question to ask. I wanted to get back to like, I don't think I made clear. So I'm fascinated by the machinations that could keep them under the second apron and open up some other options. I think the approach that I've certainly come across the most and that I sort of until today viewed as like, okay, I think this is the way if they're going to do anything is it's Connaughton and it's Portis and it's the picks. What's that getting you? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Cause like you said, is it going to take a pick to get off Connaughton's money? It's like, well, if you're adding Portis, who like, are you just like, what is the like world altering improvement that you get from those guys? So I'm really coming around to like let's really be precise about this and stay under and use the mini MLE. And then we maybe go over at the deadline with a subsequent move.
I'm trying to think of the best like realistic trade. Because if it was Alex Caruso, I'd be like, fine, operate as the second apron team, make that trade now. But he actually makes like slightly more than Pat Connaughton's on the books for. And I don't imagine they're going to want to, I mean, Alex Caruso would be more valuable to them, but like Bobby Portis in your first, does that get you Alex Caruso? Probably not. You probably need to give up that 2031 first. So staying under the second apron might open the door to say, could we go get Alex Caruso mid-season because we're able to step ladder our way there, and then we'll include the first round equity we need. Or is it Marjon Beauchamp and whoever we drafted this time? But what I was trying to say is, if you could get Ayo Dosunmu right now for 23 and Pat Connaughton, so you're not ducking the second apron, and maybe you could, but it's not going to be meaningful enough to use the mini MLE. At that point, you would have to get, again, it would come back to getting rid of Portis as well. Is that a player that would be like, that's better than anyone we're getting on the mini MLE and we'll stay with this? Like, is that, I'm trying to think of the worst player you could acquire to be like, let's not consider the options we just laid out.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty high bar to clear, but I really like Dosunmu and I would really like what he would do for the Bucks specifically. Okay. So I think he is someone that, I don't know if he's even like the absolute minimum. I think he's a little better than that for like, in terms of like, we're going to use these assets. Like, I think he's worth it, I guess, is the short answer. I don't know if the Bulls do that, first of all, like, but I think that's the type of guy that you could justify. All right, we're going to just open armed embrace all the hardship that's coming, like, for Ayo Dosunmu. I think you do it.
Don't the Bucks also have number 31?
I have it right here. So they've got number 23. I don't see them having another.
Oh no, wait, Toronto's the team with 31. I don't know why I thought that they had. I thought they had something else like in the low 30s that they could just include to say that's how you get to sumo. But yeah, point taken. So if they're surfing the minimums, maybe a reunion with Joe Ingles if the Orlando declines his like team option. We mentioned Chris Dunn. Is that someone you could get for the minimum? I don't think Markelle Fultz is going to be a minimum guy. Would you use the mini MLE on Markelle Fultz if he was willing to take it for this team?
I mean, I might. I think the mini MLE is like shockingly small. For some, it just feels like nothing. So I think I would. I mean, you could look at, if you're looking at point guards and you're trying to spend the minimum, that's probably one of the best positions to be looking at, just because, you could go down, like, Kyle Lowry might only sign for the minimum, but he might sign for another East powerhouse. Like, you've got Dunn, Morris will get more than the minimum. You could go DeLon Wright, not a true point guard, but like, Camp. There's just like Dennis Smith. There's all these guys you could go down the list on. Even like Devonte Graham, if like, because he's not going to get his salary guaranteed in San Antonio. So like, as a minimum guy, like, sorry, Bucks fans, this is what we're dealing with. But like, you could, there's plenty of point guards and ball handlers you could go get for.
Do you know who would actually be well, I mean, like Dario Saric on the minimum, I might still be intrigued. Javonte Green, if he's going to leave Chicago. What was the name that it was? I don't know why I skipped it when I thought of it, because I thought it was such a great fit. And now it's going to be lost to the ether. It popped into my head and it's gone. I don't know if there's I mean, Torrey Craig, but he has a player option, so I don't know why he would decline that to then sign for the minimum with the Bucks, unless they're going to promise him like a crap ton of playing time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, maybe you go. Are we in like
the name? I don't know how healthy he's going to be, but like Josh Richardson at the minimum, like that would be a no-brainer if he's willing to do that. That might be something that they can say, hey, yeah, you'll start too. Like, that's how you get these guys on the minimums if they have maybe some, I don't want to say more lucrative, but better options elsewhere too.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, really, Bucks much more interesting. I was wrong. I thought it would be quick, but do you think
that, so you now are leaning towards the ducking the second apron to use the mini MLE? And I guess it depends on what does it cost to get rid of Beckham.
That's the question. If it costs you one of those first, then like, I don't know, but I mean, there's so many variables. It just comes down to like, because well, even in this hypothetical where they're ducking the second apron, they're going over at the trade deadline.
Oh, right? I was right. Milwaukee has number 33 from Portland.
Oh, okay.
So like, do you think number 33 gets you off Connaughton, or no? Is that like
I mean, Connaughton's still like a usable player. I think that should be plenty. Don't you?
Would you use it to get off him and then use the mini MLE and not be a second apron team?
Well, I'd have to have a really good idea of who I was trading for at the deadline, I think.
That's a situation where if Alex Caruso or Ayo Dosunmu doesn't end up on the Bucks at the trade deadline, that's when you skewer them. But
that's going to do it for the Central Division. We will have several more of these coming up. I'm not sure what order we're going to release them in, but moving on, we'll get probably the Northwest next. So stay tuned for that one. Thanks everybody for listening. We are going to get back to, thank you all of you who have submitted stat padding and guess of players. We will get to those soon. We are trying to power through these division preview, look ahead, forecasts, prospecti in short order, because we're coming up on free agency.
That's the word. Prospecti. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a word, but it's the word for this situation. If you haven't already, remember, rate, review, subscribe, check us out on YouTube, thumbs up everything there, 5 stars, everything everywhere else. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. I think it's going to cover it. Shout out Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.